Hello, everyone. This is Keith Schmitz. I'm founder of Grassroots North Shore and the steering committee member, and I'm welcoming you all to our podcast extravaganza. Now, we've cleared the holidays and hope you've enjoyed yourself, but now we are facing a huge job this year. Sure, vote, but we are going to need every single one of you to participate in the fight of our lives to make sure this election is not our last election. I'm talking about volunteers, but on top of that, while we are glad you are with us, if you can, consider donating to our efforts to make these campaigns happen. Information on how will be forwarded to you towards the end of the Zoom call. So Grassroots North Shore is going to turn 20 years old this year. Hard to believe back when we finished up the 2004 election at North Shore Presbyterian that someday it would all lead to this. So with your help, we have become one of the premier progressive grassroots groups in the state. And though we have made significant contributions to keep progressive aspirations going, 2024 looms monstrously large. And as President Biden would say, I'm not kidding. American democracy is facing its biggest threat since the Nazis in World War II. That threat has a name, and it's Donald Trump. He has made it clearly known that if he gets elected, he will put into place a cult of personality, authoritarian government. He would come back into power smarter about how government runs, believe it or not, and will be backed up by a rabid group of supporters, many of whom will resort to violence. So on this topic, shortly you will be hearing from the nationally known expert on fascism, Dr. Ruth Ben-Ghiat, who will explain how fascism works, its threat to this country, and how we can fight it. I am followed by Grassroots North Shore Debbie Patel, who will be talking further about our mission and will be interviewing Dr. Ben-Ghiat. So thanks for your time, and on to you, Debbie.
Thanks, Keith. Thank you very much for that. I'm one of the co-chairs of Grassroots North Shore, along with Cheryl Moranto. And first, I'm going to start with some housekeeping matters. But before that, I just want to let people know that this is our annual fundraiser, and we have a very special, something very special happened, that an anonymous donor has offered to match donations $1 per dollar. So any dollar that you give in connection with this fundraiser will be matched up to $3,000. So I'm making a shout out to Anonymous. That's what I will call that person for the rest of the evening. So housekeeping, we will start with a series of short video clips. The first is of people who participated in last spring's annual meeting. It was an in-person meeting. Thank you for having in-person meetings. And we will have another, and our annual meeting will be in May, I think, and it will also be in person. Then we're going to get a message from Tammy Baldwin in the video. Then we hear from our volunteer of the year, Tom Heppy. And then the video clips end with a clip put together. It's must see from Mark Guinness, who is our membership chair, and it's a fabulous video. Then I will be interviewing the wonderful Ruth Ben-Ghiat, as Keith mentioned. And I want to say that she waived any fee to join us tonight because she cares about Wisconsin. And of course, if we were in person, we couldn't have gotten her. So that's wonderful. Then we have Wisconsin's own state senator, Chris Larson. And then, as I mentioned, Cheryl Moranto will be coming back to close the evening off. In the next few days, you're going to get a follow-up email from Grassroots North Shore. It will have the video, which will also go up online. It'll, of course, we'll have a donate button if you would like to donate, if it meets your budget and your wishes. And then it will have a lot of information that's follow up to what you hear tonight. So with that said, I am going to start the video.
Well, it is good to be back, and the energy is definitely here. And you see other folks, and you can actually express yourself or feel like it. And yeah, I think it's good.
Well, there is certainly an energy in the room, and And I think especially when it comes to political things is that we feed off of each other. We need that energy person to person. And I think that's something that we get from grassroots. There are people here that are so intelligent and energetic and give of themselves. And that's something you feed off of, and you take that home. You don't get that, online. And there's definitely something there. You feel it in the room. It's palatable when you walk in. And we've always felt that way about this. It's just very, very important. I was so excited that we were back in person again. That they will be willing to get out and do things, whether it be to canvass, whether it be to write postcards, to have somebody in their home, whether it's having your neighbors over and start conversations about why politics is important. It's not just tribalism. This is our future, and it's our responsibility. It's a responsibility to us, but also to our children and to our grandchildren. It's the future of this country.
Well, it's very important to me to connect with people like my wife and myself, Joanne and I, who live in Shorewood. I'm Gus. Because, well, number one, we want honest government. We want good candidates. We want an honest government. And Grassroots North Shore gives me the best hope. And I know from other elections and other people elected and who gained office, they're very qualified and very good candidates, and they're doing a good job right now. Aforementioned, it connects us, it unites us, and it's my hope that things are, I think the North Shore is in good shape, and I think it's getting better, and I think when it comes to statewide elections, I think we really count and lead the way.
It's nice to meet everyone. It's nice to have a sense of community with like-minded people. I think sometimes you can, feel alone and, your thoughts about things and feel like you're the only person that, shares these beliefs, and you can start to feel a little crazy and isolated. So it's just nice to meet people who also want to make a difference and see a positive change in their community. The benefit of that is being a part of a positive community. I think where politics can be very divisive, and then I guess when you watch the news, it just seems very negative and very much like the world can't change, and that it's hard to make a difference. But I think going to these events and seeing how positive the group can be, and the atmosphere and the excitement, it can be very contagious, and you can go home, feeling reinvigorated to get involved with politics in Wisconsin.
Hello, everyone at Grassroots North Shore. Thank you for all the great work you do. I know the work you do isn't easy, but it is so, so important. For 20 years, you have served as a critical source of information and organizing, empowering Wisconsinites to participate effectively in civic engagement. More recently, we could not have reelected Governor Evers or elected Justice Janet to the Supreme Court without you. The phone calls, knocking on doors, and having those one-on-one conversations with friends, family members, and neighbors, that's what wins elections. It's hard work, but you did it, and it made all the difference. You showed the rest of the state that when we compete in Milwaukee's North Shore area, we can win up and down the ballot. And you showed the rest of our country that when Wisconsinites put their mind to something, we can achieve it. This year, stakes are going to be higher than ever. Once again, Wisconsin is going to be the key battleground state to watch. On Election Day, Wisconsin voters will have the power to determine who controls the United States Senate, the White House, and ultimately the future of our country. From cutting costs and helping working families get ahead, to restoring reproductive freedoms and upholding our democracy, it's all going to be on the ballot in 2024. I know many of you have been with me since day one. I am so grateful for your continued help and support. But I need your help now more than ever, and I'm going to continue to ask for that help over the next few months. This year, we're going to have to get out there and organize like never before, so that come election day, we know that we did everything we could to elect Democrats up and down the ballot here in the critical state of Wisconsin. You have my word that I will keep standing up for what I believe, keep taking on the folks holding working families back, and keep winning those fights that matter most to Wisconsinites. Thank you all for letting me join you tonight, and let's keep up the great work in 2024.
Hey, good evening, grassroots members. Tom Happy here. I've been asked to give some reflections on my volunteering work with Grassroots North Shore. I been with them, I think, 10 to 15 years. My background's social work, so I'm always concerned with social issues, which involves politics. And so I started doing door-to-door stuff many, many years ago. And a little bit scary at first, but once you get into it, I mean, prior to that, I was working. And so once I retired, I'd sit around the house and complain about what's going on in politics. And I remember back a sociology professor I had who talked about the whole thing about small community groups being the answer. So I said, well, I better get going here. I do have a little Catholic guilt also with that. So I'm out of the house and onto the doors, and I have some interesting experiences. I got involved further on by doing phone calls, which I was terribly petrified about. And one day I was doing phone calls in a grassroots office, and there was a political candidate in there who listened to my voice and said, God, you got such a great voice on the phone. Can you work for me? So I said, well, that gave me more positive encouragement. I mean, with doors, with phones, I also do writing letters. That's the easiest thing. You're in your house. All you have to do is write on a postcard. And that's the easiest. But the doors and the phones, you have to deal with the fact that people hang up on you, yell at you. First time last year, I had someone tell me to get out of their yard. That was a little bit scary. I didn't know exactly what might be coming next. But my philosophy has become, even though you maybe only get to a few people on the doors, some don't answer. I know they're in there. Why aren't they answering? Or they come and they slam the door in your face. I'm into this thing called a multiplier effect. So if I talk to one or two people, I reach one or two people on the phone, and in that same day, there's thousands of other people, depending if it's a local political election. All of us together, if we had one or two people, that can make a difference. And that's what you get occasionally at the door. Someone will say, God, thanks for doing this, Tom. Or on the phone, someone will say, I didn't know there was an election coming up. Is there? And you give them the information. Again, this doesn't happen 50 times every time you do this, but every one or two times. And the multiplier effect to me is what's, the important thing. Now, this coming year, I mean, in the past, most of the times I was doing this stuff, I would always say, oh, this is a critical election for governor, state senator, even presidents in the past. This year, as I'm talking to people, I'm scared, like many other people are scared, that this election is maybe the most critical because of democracy. And so the candidates are important, of course, but democracy is, I think, in trouble, in danger. And so I'm going to be out there, encourage all of you to get out there, get your friends maybe invited to join you. And we're going to have a great 2024 and celebrate Joe Biden's win. Thank you.
Mark, this war is horrible. They're destroying our nation. What do they want? Where did they come from? And when will this ever end? What they want is power and control. But we are mobilizing all resources and plan to defeat them finally in November. As to where they come from, grassroots scientists have discovered an anomalous solar system millions of light years from here. In the center of this solar system, there seems to be a huge orange gas ball surrounded by a powerful force field. The orbiting planets have the most unusual feature of looking very much like some of our state's worst legislators. There's two planets that look like Janet Branshin and Dan Knodel. What we do know is that none of the orbiting planets can support life, nor can they support liberty or the pursuit of happiness. Their weapons are indeed formidable and have done great damage to our state and nation. To keep control, they use the process known as gerrymandering to great effectiveness. Here's an example of what they did to one of Wisconsin's assembly districts. Diabolical. They're easy to spot now because of their bizarre disguises and their voting record. We interrupt this program to bring you a special announcement from the Grassroots Emergency Broadcast System. A little while ago, a video was detected and circulated on Donald Trump's Truth Social platform. The video was picked up by many networks, including CNN. This is that video.
And on June 14th, 1946, God looked down on his planned paradise and said, I need a caretaker. So God gave us Trump. God said, I need somebody willing to get up before dawn, fix this country, work all day, fight the Marxists, eat supper, then go to the Oval Office and stay past midnight at a meeting of the heads of state. So God made Trump.
Sorry to interrupt the program like that, but I thought it important you see this video. This video is real and really scary. My name is Mark Guinness. I co-chair the membership committee along with Kath Michael of Grassroots North Shore. Look, Donald Trump has proven to be a self-centered, deranged, paranoid, delusional maniac. And unfortunately, many in the Republican Party, including our own state legislature, have decided to follow this guy. It's as if they're all behaving like they're in a cult. Unfortunately, what's been done is the soil's been prepared, roots are taking hold, and now we are seeing fascism growing throughout the land. And it's up to us to stamp this out once and for all this November. What we need to do now is mobilize resources. That includes funding and boots on the ground. If you've never joined Grassroots North Shore, do so now. It's only $30 a year for a family, $20 for an individual, $5 for a student. You can do this online. You can renew your membership online. You can donate online. And remember, this is a fundraiser. We also want you. We want you involved with this great organization. We want you to share your talents with this great organization. We want you to help Grassroots North Shore grow and thrive. We know things can sometimes look pretty bleak out there, but let's remember the successes and end this on a high note. There's Janet Protasevich, Tony Evers, Tammy Baldwin, Deb Andraka, Josh Call. And with fair maps in place, I think we have a great chance of defeating fascism and saving our democracy. Grassroots North Shore, we know we're going to do our job. What we need is for you to do yours. Thank you.
All right. That I just loved that piece by Mark Ennis, and I will add that since he made that little film, or his part of the film, we've had more good news on the fair maps front. So I'm very hopeful that we will have good maps soon in Wisconsin. There are many ways to fight for democracy in America, and this event is one of them. And that's why I'm extra excited that Dr. Ruth Ben-Ghiat can join us tonight. Donald Trump, who you know, he claims to have been sent by God, hasn't been stopped by the Republican Party, and indeed, he's getting stronger every day. He is a strong man, and he must be stopped. And to do that, we need to stay lucid, which I interpret as awake and clear-headed. You may have seen Ruth Ben-Ghiat on television, or you might have read her book, The Strong Men. You might have seen her in the press, or like me, you might also be following her through her Lucid column on Substack. She understands our state of affairs, and through her column, she explains it to the rest of us. And I want to thank you, Ruth, for coming in to spend some time with us tonight. I know you have your own Lucid meeting later on tonight, and I look forward to joining you there. Ruth is the professor of history and Italian studies at New York University. She writes about fascism, authoritarianism, propaganda, and democracy protection. She's a recipient of Guggenheim and other fellowships. She's advisor to Protect Democracy, an MSNBC opinion columnist, and she appears frequently on MSNBC, PBS, and other networks. And her latest book, Strong Men, Mussolini to the Present, examines how illiberal leaders use corruption, violence, propaganda, and machismo to stay in power, and how resistance to them has unfolded over a century. So thank you again for being here. We asked Grassroots North Shore members to give us some questions to ask you. And here's the first one. So just last week, you and other internationally respected democracy experts filed an amicus brief with the United States Supreme Court in the Trump disqualification lawsuit. And that's a good lead into the first question posed by our members. What are your thoughts on the situation in America as it relates to what you know of history and authoritarianism here and abroad?
Yeah, so thank you for having me. I'm very, very happy to speak to you and admire all that you're doing. I do agree with Mark that we have a great chance to defeat this if we are organized. It's, you know, a lot of the countries where we hear about pro-democracy movements that succeed, some of them are much smaller than the United States. So we don't have a genuine pro-democracy movement like on a national scale that's organized. So we do things locally, right? Just the same with our states' rights. Things are different in our country. And the other thing is a lot of countries that are able to have pro-democracy movements that organize successfully, they do that when they've had an experience of national dictatorship. So most recently, we saw Poland very, very inspiring. They had 7 years of far-right populist leadership, and abortion rights were practically gone. And then they did a U-turn, and they had this March of a Million Hearts. And Poland has had a long communist dictatorship, was occupied by the Nazis, and so they know the stakes. And so one thing that we, not you, because you are active, you are doing exactly what's needed, but we as a people, although the Jim Crow South was an example of kind of repressive authoritarian rule, we haven't had a national experience of dictatorship. So people are, as we know, too many people think it's all going to be fine, or Trump's just a clown. He doesn't mean what he's saying. And this is something that has happened throughout history because it's so ludicrous. The people who are proclaimed to pick up the video that was shown. I actually did a column in Lucid called "Corruption and Holiness," trying to get behind the propaganda. And one of the things is that it's the most depraved and impious people who are proclaimed as the holy ones to lead the nation to greatness. So Mussolini was a total atheist. He hated the church. He was a serial rapist. He was obviously a bloody dictator. And he was proclaimed as, there by the will of God, and the Vatican endorsed him. And now we have Trump. I can't think of somebody less suited in all of America to be proclaimed as there by the will of God. And yet that's been going on for years, for many years. That's part of the kind of loyalty performances. And it's reaching a peak now because he's, running for office. So where are we? It's easy to feel that things are very dire, because in one way they are. It's very unusual, as we wrote in the brief, for somebody who organized and incited a violent coup to just be out, pay no price yet, not be in jail, not be in exile. And of course, the GOP is totally radicalized. Now it's a totally autocratic party. So this is a very difficult situation. But it's also important not to fall into fatalism. And yes, there are polls that can come out that says today in this area, Trump's 3 points ahead or 5 points ahead of Biden. It's very important to keep the big picture and to keep doing your work, because the election is not tomorrow. Many things can happen. And the right is extremely specialized and effective at psychological warfare. And this has been going on for years. And I think that many Americans haven't even reckoned with the toll of this psychological warfare on them personally, on their families. So many people have ruptures in their families because, MAGA, people have gone over to MAGA. And it's important not to despair and not to tune out, because that's what they want. That's the purpose of psychological warfare, is to exhaust you, to make you feel there's nothing you can do, that Trump is inevitable, Trump's omnipotent. He's even there by the will of God. And who can oppose God? So that's just a general answer. Where are we? We're in a difficult place, but we have huge resources, and there's so many good things going on, and that we have to hold on to that.
I forgot to unmute myself. Now I'm unmuted. So that is really good advice for me. It's good knowledge as well as advice. The next question that came in doesn't really need much of a setup, other than to say that we hear phrases like Trump's first day and dictator for a day and Project 2025, revenge and retribution. What if Trump gets elected? Based on your knowledge, what can we expect?
So nothing good. It's very interesting. Last time Trump won 0.0, the so-called ban on Muslim travel into the United States was an executive order. And as I wrote in Strongman, it was very interesting to discover that was only one of a projected 100 executive orders that Bannon and Stephen Miller wanted to unleash on the American people, like a blitzkrieg, right? But they didn't have the means. They weren't set up yet. So now they've spent, and they and so many others, and now there's Project 2025. So we could expect some kind of very flashy initial repressive legislation, right? Many things going on. Now, I'm very disturbed that Trump is talking about repeatedly that we are going to have a terrorist attack. Now, I don't know if you've heard him say that, but he said it 3 or 4 times. This is his new theme. He says 100%. So, why say such a thing? It's to obviously get people feeling helpless and scared, so they will vote for him, the big strong man who's going to fix everything. But, autocrats, when they first come in, this is what Hitler did, of course, you either create a big problem, or you exploit, you know how to exploit a problem that you maybe didn't create, like the Reichstag fire, and then you run with it to shut down, rights. So we could expect something at the beginning, but obviously he's telling us what he wants to do. Mass deportations, obviously taking all kinds of rights away. So we could expect that. We could also expect lots of resistance of the type that we already saw. That indeed it's very important that 60 judges after Trump claimed he won the election turned back his claims. And even to this day, when Trump sued CNN, for example, $350 million lawsuit, and I was mentioned in the suit because one of my articles pissed them off on his big lie. And it was dismissed by a Trump-appointed judge. And that was fairly recently. So Trump and Trumpers have not been able to purge the judiciary to an extent like a Viktor Orban. And it takes years to get to that place. It took Viktor Orban's, he's been in power over a decade. It really does take a lot, unless you come in and, again, you're pulling a Hitler or you're having a coup. It takes a long time to purge the system. Now, Project 2025 is saying they're going to have these mass firings, but these things can be contested. So that's where, yes, it's scary. Yes, things will happen. General Mark Milley says he's on a list and he expects that they'll try to arrest him, and he doesn't speak like most military people. They're very careful what they say. So there will be those things. But there's lots of things that could happen in response to those things. So that's the bad part, but also it's not like it's just going to steamroll through, and it could also not happen. And the best medicine is to not let him get into office in the first place, obviously.
Obviously, right. So one of the things I'm hearing from you, although I'm not sure you said it directly this way, is that we really need to believe what he says, that he will do what he can do if he can get away with it, right? So that's one
Yes.
thing that don't say, oh, he's just talking. The other thing I think that's interesting that I heard from that is, I know in 2016, after the election, I told my friends that I had joined the American resistance movement, and they all thought I was nuts. But now there's a bunch of us that are in what I think of as the American resistance movement, and that will certainly happen too if he gets elected. And hopefully that is a very big, I think it's a very big if we all play our part and work as hard as we can. It's certainly not fait accompli. So
no, and I just want to say, we are in the middle of a global renaissance of nonviolent protest, and we are part of it. All over the world, think about it. These are places that rarely have, like Iran, mass nonviolent demonstrations, or Israel, and especially before October 7th. But that they involved what we call pillars of society, like CEOs, and even Mossad was giving people the day off. Mossad, is not the most progressive place.
Right.
They gave people their employees the day off to protest. Right. So we had, and we are fully in this. And then Chile, there are many other examples I could give, but no one talks about the Women's March anymore, which is irritating to me because it was the largest protest in American history. And 400 organizations came together, but it was surpassed by Black Lives Matter, which then became the largest protest. And it was, as you know, overwhelmingly nonviolent. 99%, 20 million people. That's, it's always hard to estimate, but about 20 million people, multiracial, multi-generational, participated. So those energies are there. They haven't just all disappeared. So I would expect that some form of American resistance that shows
Right.
itself.
Right.
So that, and then just one other thing about the taking Trump seriously. What he's a propagandist. He's a superb propagandist, and what he's been doing is educating Americans to want dictatorship and to want a strong man. And so every time he holds a rally, he doesn't praise Democratic leaders. He praises Putin, praises Xi, he even praises the leader of North Korea, like a murderous kleptocracy, just like Russia too. And he's doing it over and over and over again because he wants to shift the way Americans who haven't had rulers like that feel about somebody like that, which would be him. So that's why we take him seriously, because it's part of a very planned out strategy as a propagandist, and he repeats it over and over again, which is what you have to do to have your propaganda believed.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to do a tiny setup for well, not too tiny, a little story setup for the third question, which I think is a really good one. We have one child, and she lives in the Netherlands. And we have a friend from long ago. He's been dead since the 2006 or 7. His name was Ike, and we met him in Aruba, and he was pretty much considered the founder of Aruban touristry right after World War II. He and his wife moved to Aruba. But when the Second World War broke out and Hitler marched into the Netherlands, Ike and his wife, Ike was part of a family butcher business in Rotterdam. And his brother was in the business, and his whole family. So they were Jewish. And when Hitler invaded the Netherlands, they went into hiding. And the whole family went into hiding, and they were split up. And Ike and his wife ended up in one place. The baby son was taken out to live with a Catholic family at the beginning of the war, and didn't even know he was Jewish until he was 5 or 6 years old. That's how long he was there. And Ike's landlady, who had a 3-year-old daughter, hid Ike and his wife basically in a closet during the entire war. And they survived. They never got caught. Ike and his wife survived. The landlady didn't get caught. The child was fine. But everyone else basically perished, right? His brother perished. They all ended up in concentration camps. And I've asked myself, what is it that made Ike's landlady do what she did versus the neighbors that were turning in and refuting his brother and his parents and all that sort of thing. So that leads me to this. I think it's a pretty important question. Would you talk a bit about the breakdown in civility and in norms in polite society when authoritarians take hold? What does that do to us and our neighbors?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's an incredible story. And there were so many people who were hid, and they were hidden, and usually there was somebody who knew and chose. The circle of people who chose not to say anything was usually beyond the family. But it was dangerous because what authoritarian states do is they turn societies against each other. They turn people against each other. They give you incentives for spying on each other, meaning it could be jobs, it could be status in society, of course, money. Also, they inculcate, this is where Trump being such a good propagandist is scary. They inculcate fanaticism. And one technique which we see is going on here, but is a classic from the days of fascism, is that you single out certain groups and you depict them as an existential threat. It's very important that it's this dire threat, so that they're not just a threat to some people, they're a threat to you. So when Trump says they're not coming for me, because he does the victim thing, they're coming for you. And so people feel that they are personally in danger from the Jews, the Mexicans, that you can just plug in all the people they're in danger from. And this is how you change the perception of violence. And so people don't just accept repressive measures, taking people away, penning them up, killing them even. They will, maybe they're not doing it themselves, but they will tolerate it. They will say, okay, so there's having an existential threat. There's making it incentives for people to look the other way, or incentives to actually spy on each other. And that's what's happening in schools, where there's, all these laws were created to divide us about, so teachers can't talk about this, students can't read this book, librarians can't do this. And so this is all part of, or with states that are trying to take away abortion rights, and they put a bounty. So it's not just the doctor who's providing abortions who could get in trouble. It's anybody who helps, anybody who wants an abortion. So the circle widens. So I see all of these measures in that optic, of trying to involve more people in ways that are devastating for civil society.
Is there a way that we can be alert to this? I mean, how do we, I think of the movie, what is the movie where they just take over your body and then you take, and is there a way to prevent this from happening to ourselves? Do you have any ideas on how you sort of identify this?
Well, what I always tried to do, and this is what the project of Lucid is, and the reason I picked the title Lucid, is to try and understand what's behind it. Like, what is the intent here when Trump talks about, if we don't fight like hell, we're not going to have a country anymore. That's another existent, like it's me or it's the abyss. And he's doing it to get people into such a state of mind of anxiety, like the terrorist attack now, that they will use violence. They will do things that they never thought they would do. And here we have also the GOP lawmakers. I think not that many of them thought that they would be defending an assault on Mike Pence, who was targeted to be killed. And they were targeted to be killed. I don't think they had that in their bingo cards. And yet they went along with it. They are going along with it. So we can try to see what the mechanism is, why it's being done, and call it out. That's what I try to do.
So do you think, just to follow up on that, do you think that the Cruzes and the Josh Hawleys, do you think that they've drunk the Kool-Aid, or do you think that they're using it for their own gain? Do you have a sense on that?
Yeah, mostly it's the latter. There are the true believers like Lindsey Graham, who had some kind of conversion. Why did he have some kind of conversion? I don't know. Trump has dirt on everyone. Trump threatens everyone. The more you know about these things, it's incredible, because there's so many tales of, senators secretly crying out of fear because, they wanted to they wanted to vote to impeach Trump, and then they were threatened. Their wife was threatened. Their children were threatened. There's a lot more of that than we know about. So some people were made to see, it's like organized crime, right? They were made to see the benefits of being outwardly a true believer. Others are just like Hawley. He's a smart guy, and they're just going along with Trump because they see he's their vehicle to get to power. They want to get to power.
Sure.
And they've lost all, they're not in democracy anymore. They're an autocratic party. So they don't actually care. They have no morals, nothing. So they don't care what he does anymore. I mean, he did the worst thing he could possibly do. He
Sure.
did January 6th.
Right.
And so what these people do is they lower the bar and they behave worse and worse and worse as a test. And usually these politicians who are opportunists, they fail the test, and what I say in strongmen is once they make it's called the authoritarian bargain, that they're going to support the leader in return for power and goodies. And once those deals are made, they really last no matter what this depraved monster does. They don't drop him. It's very rare. And you see in our country, it's been very rare, even though we're not in a dictatorship. And it's not like they're going to go to jail, or it's not Mobutu's Congo where they're going to be executed. They could just go into private life, and yet they're all still there except for just a handful.
And do you think when he was coming into power in 2016, do you think that it's similar to the people in Germany that thought they could control Hitler, that they thought they could control Trump? Do you think that there's similarities? Do you think there's similarities there?
I think some people in 2016 were misguided. They thought that he was a clown and they would be able to, because he is such a blusterer and doesn't come from politics. But by 2020, they know what he's about.
Sure.
But they've been brought into line.
But now they're in there and they can't get out. So.
It's called it's actually, the process is called autocratic capture. And autocratic capture, as in you're captured, and it's used for like what Viktor Orban does to the judiciary, to the press, but it's used for parties too. So Trump has captured the party.
Right.
And it's his personal tool.
Sure.
Right. So they can't get out. They could get out. It's one of the saddest things is the exit from the Trump highway to hell was on January 7th. Mike Pence could have easily, because he had some high moral ground at that day. And he could have led everybody, like Mitch McConnell was saying. A lot of them were like, whoa, what was this? This is not what we're about. And nobody wanted to do that. And so they missed the exit.
Sure. So we have a few minutes, and there's a couple of questions that I'd be interested in hearing. One is, what haven't you said tonight? Haven't you shared tonight that you'd like to share with us? Because we do have a few minutes left. And then the other one, and you've talked about this, but like what gives you hope going forward? So
I think, I'm very the fact that you're doing things, that you're working at a grassroots level, that's very important. It's very inspiring. And it can, it's canvassing and phone banking. It can be tiresome work, but it's very important work, because one of the things we have to do is get people to vote. We have to educate people for the dangers, because yes, there's the MAGAs who aren't going to listen, but there's all these other people who maybe haven't voted in the past, or they're independents, and we have to reach out to them and have them understand what the stakes are. And so that's only done in a kind of painstaking way. So congratulations that you are doing
the
that.
daily slog, right? Yeah,
it is the
right.
daily slog. And
Right.
but resistors who have ultimately contributed to change have also said this. It's a slog for all of them. And then a collective moment builds based on all the work that's done. And I think that then you can have a momentum. And the other thing is, you know, nobody thought that Biden was going to win. This is, again, we've been psychologically conditioned to be almost like defeatist. And so people were amazed that Biden won. Also, don't forget that the midterms in 2018 and 2022 were huge successes. There was like, you know, record numbers of people of color came into office 2022, record numbers of gay people, just all kinds of records were broken less than 2 years ago.
Right.
So it's there. And
Okay.
we have to hold on to that.
Good, good. And do you have anything else to share? Otherwise, I know you have. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your about the Lucid group that you have, the
Yeah.
actual Lucid community, because I know that we scheduled this event at this point because you're going from this event to prepare for that event. So tell us a little bit about that. Some of us go to it, so but tell us about it.
Yeah, it's been very interesting and rewarding. So there's so many Substacks, as you know. But for me, I thought it's not enough to just write essays. I write for the MSNBC and the Atlantic. I didn't want to just write essays. I wanted to have contact with people and to form a community of sorts. And so I added in a weekly Q&A where at first it was for everyone, and then we got hacked by like fascists, basically. So then I put a paywall to keep out, you know, trolls, and that works fine. And we've been doing it for almost 2 years, or over 2 years actually, every week, with some exceptions if I travel. And so some people say it's like their therapy session because it's a certain same day, you know, same time every week. And a community has formed. And people can ask questions live. I talk for a little while. I often have guests, and that's really fun. I've started just very recently to record the first half, but for example, I never wanted to record the whole thing because I want people to have their privacy respected, because they're asking questions live in front of hundreds of people.
Right.
So it's been very gratifying to see people who are very shy have trust in the group. And I have learned a ton from people, and we think through things together. We think about language, we think about strategy. So Lucid is both my wisdom and my research translated into weekly essays, but it's also this live community, which is very important to me, at least.
And I know that the first time I tuned in, I'm not shy, so I asked a question and you called on me, and it was a very welcoming community. So I thank you. I thank you for doing that. And I know sometimes you say, "Oh, I don't know, but I'm going to put that down. I'll think about that." So I want to thank you again for coming, and we are going to let you go prepare for your Lucid community meeting, which the first week of the month is on a Sunday night. Otherwise, it's at noon Central. Is it noon Central, 1 o'clock Eastern on Friday? So, and to the people listening tonight or watching tonight, a link to the Lucid Substack will be there, and we encourage you to join. So, thank you again, Ruth. We'll let you go for the evening, and I will see you in not too long in the Lucid community.
Thank you all for what you're doing. Bye.
Sure. Bye. So I want to follow up before I introduce Chris. Once I introduce Senator Larson, then you won't be seeing me again for the rest of the night, and I can just relax. But I wanted to just do a little follow-up on my story about my friend Ike Cohen, and how I feel about the Netherlands and how I felt on my trip there this year. So we spent 2 weeks with our daughter, and she has a dog, and she lives on a canal, and I had a wonderful time. And then it was time to go home, and I thought, why do I have to go home? Oh my God, I'm going back to America. Oh no. I was just like, why me? Why do I have to do this? And I got on the plane and I thought about Ike's landlady and what she did. And I thought long and hard about how I felt about the work that I was doing and the people that I love that are doing the same work. And so I'm on the plane and I'm thinking, I'm tired. I don't have to do this. I could just hide under the bed. I could just, do whatever. But I wanted to say that at one point, it wasn't long when Ike was 95, we were down in Aruba and he had a big birthday blowout. And I got to meet the landlady and the landlady's daughter. And I wish I could speak Dutch because they didn't really speak much English. But I thought about that on the plane again, about what they risked, because to do what she thought was right. And Ruth is right. It's an incredible story. And as I was flying back, I thought, we all have choices and this is your time, right? This is our time. This is not about me. This is about all of us. This is our time to make our choices. And I came back really feeling, I'm not saying I would say renewed, but I felt really determined. And I started this new mantra, to myself, which I say on occasion. It's like, well, what I can do, I must do, and so I will do, right? So I actually even had a bit of a cry on the plane because it's just like, feeling so exhausted, but maybe feeling inspired by Ike's landlady. So ask yourself what you can do. Is it donate? Thank you again, Anonymous, for matching funds up to $3,000 from this fundraiser. Is it knocking doors? Is it writing letters to the editor? It's whatever you do. It's really, really important. So I'm going to leave you with that thought before I turn our focus to Wisconsin and our next guest. And we welcome Senator Chris Larson to bring our attention to some of the most egregious examples of undemocratic leadership in our own state. Senator Chris Larson represents the 7th Senate District, which encompasses part of the city of Milwaukee and regions to the south and west. He fits his district well as a staunch defender of unions. He's a proven fighter for the working class. He's a trusted challenger of the establishment. And Chris spends his time in Madison fighting for bold progressive agenda. He works on issues we care about, like legalizing marijuana, supporting public schools, fighting climate change, protecting abortion rights, and more. He was born and raised in Wisconsin, and he graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee with a degree in finance and a minor in political science. He's tireless. He goes everywhere, tries to help everyone, and today he's helping Grassroots North Shore raise funds for the year ahead, and he's helping us all prepare for the year ahead. Another soft reminder that this is an annual fundraiser. And with that, I'm going to turn you over to Chris. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm going to go off screen and mute myself. And after Chris talks, Cheryl Moranto will bring the evening to a close. Take care.
Thank you so much, Debbie, for the kind intro. And thank you. I'm almost speechless. So you say all that right before I'm supposed to give a speech to the group, which makes it a little bit tough. But thanks. I feel like a lot of what we'd heard already from Ruth, and then as I'm about to dive into the Wisconsin specific stuff, it can leave you with the feeling like that of being on a plane, right, and having to head back and not wanting to. So that does make it tough. But I think that there is a contagious feeling going around that we have all once had at some point, and it seems to be spreading. This, of course, is not just the the latest strand of COVID or the flu, but actually something better than that, and hopefully more contagious, and that is hope. We have had a dearth of hope for quite a while in the state, and I kind of want to go and dive in and analyze why I think that is, and why it's so important to renew that and refresh that and make sure that it is contagious. We have not had a robust protest unifying the state here in Wisconsin in years, and I think that's an important thing. Where as we're looking at other states, a lot of their successes were preceded by people standing up. Workers standing up, teachers standing up, to be able to demand women standing up in Michigan before they were able to overturn the abortion ban in the state. You see it across the country, and I feel like we just haven't had that here, and I think I know why. But I think it's important to recognize what's at stake. I'm gonna open just real quick because I have the ability to talk about my favorite issue, which is public education. And as much as the other side is looking at the back of the good old days, I think it's important to recognize we never had good old days. It's only the promise that we have not yet achieved. Vouchers are about to be unleashed on a whole new level from what we've ever seen. The caps are about to come off. And these, of course, take away from public education fund. This is in part to the governor cutting a deal with Republicans against public education when he signed the budget, kind of at a gunpoint by the Republicans for a $325 per pupil increase. But this is going to have devastating effects because it precedes 2 years from when the voucher caps come off. And we know that since June 2023, public education train would be crashing up the line. So unfortunately, nothing was done yet. But school districts are frantically trying to make it up, which is why I mentioned at the top here, because I do think everyone who is in public education or around it is hearing from your friends who are in it. If you are a teacher or a retired teacher or have relatives who are teachers, please check in on them. Because they all got notices pretty much across the board about shrinking schools, staffs. And of course, it's no coincidence, right? Or it's not a coincidence that public education continues to be targeted. And I think for those who've been in the fight, you can't draw that line, but easily. But I think given what Ruth is saying and given where we are, there is a direct line towards cutting education, right, and replacing it with something more nefarious. So there's $1.5 billion up for grabs in 106 referendums trying to make up for what the state had. And this is at a time where we have a $7 billion surplus. So as trusted leaders in the community, tell your friends to make sure that they vote, because there's chances are pretty good that they're going to have a referendum up either this spring or this fall to try and make up for that. And yeah, it's tough, but we've got to make sure to fund public education. What's the old saying? If you think funding education is expensive, try ignorance. So, and of course, we're closer than ever to trying to be able to get it to where everyone has access to it, which is not always the case throughout history. So starting on our journey of where we are now. So I'm going to coincide it with mine. I was first elected back in the state Senate back in November of 2010. 2010, of course, probably brings a shiver down anybody's spine who was around for that election cycle. But I remember being on campus at UW-Milwaukee and having so much hope just overflowing with it as I talked to students. Which is something I try to do every election. It's a place that is always refreshing hope. But I was on that campus, election day, 2010, when Mayor Tom Barrett walked up to close the final hour or two before polls close. And I virtually skipped over to him from the dorms where I'd been talking to students. This is back when I was still in my 20s. So, pretty close to skipping age. Went up to Tom Barrett and asked, how I think things were going across the state. I'll never forget what he said in a very stern way. Said, well, if I start my speech by saying, and I'm going to say how the heck, because I know we're trying to resist swearing in this one, but he didn't say heck. How the heck did that happen? If I say that, that means we won. And with that, like the hope kind of drained out of me. And I remember later, some of my friends thought that I wasn't doing all right because I gave my victory speech, being elected to the state Senate, room full of supporters. Basically gave that speech not to the supporters in the room, but to my feet, as we were on the precipice of having lost the governorship, having lost the state Senate. As I found out, text after text, phone call after phone call. People still made phone calls back then over texting. And then lost the state assembly, right? And then we found out we lost nationally the U.S. House, right? And what Barack Obama would go on to call the shellacking. We ended up losing a chunk of state houses across the country, as well as a majority of governorships. And that was the real start of it, because it wasn't just any election cycle. This was a census year in 2010. So it really set the stage for what we ended up seeing for the ever since then. When we went into session, I was the only new Democrat. I was excited to see that Wisconsin really was fighting back. We saw some of the largest protests in state history. Many of you were there, pushing back on the environmental rollbacks, the erosion of voting rights, and of course, the full attack on collective bargaining rights of public employees just before Scott Walker and Republicans delivered the largest cut to education in state history. Republicans adopted a philosophy at the time that didn't seem like it would go well for them. And that was, it's held mostly true for the last decade. And that philosophy, that strategy, has been as long as they can rig the maps and tilt elections in their favor, they can continue to govern without the support of a majority of voters. And they could ignore the public and still stay in power. I know, having talked to many of you, your rep, your senator for a long time just didn't respond at all, which is how I've inherited so many adopted constituents who reach out to my office, and I do appreciate it. But hopefully, we'll get you your own senator if I'm not lucky enough to represent you yet. Hopefully, we'll get you one very shortly. Anyways, they're using those rigged maps. They've ignored the people. This would prove very disheartening for many voters who just stopped calling their legislators because they believed they would be ignored, because they had been ignored in the past. Their plan of hoarding power and snuffing out democracy worked to a large degree from 2010 to 2018. Republicans held a trifecta in the state of Wisconsin, right? Scott Walker was the governor, but also they ruled the courts, which they had held since 2007, and the Senate and the Assembly, as I already mentioned. While they used their power to stifle dissent, the wealthy interests continued to look past this as long as they got their way in the form of huge tax cuts called the Agriculture and Manufacturing Tax Credit, and more. Basically cutting the top income bracket. Republicans used their ill-gotten power to give those huge tax cuts to the rich, while at the same time blocking access to things that are wildly popular, like the Medicaid expansion. And they did that, of course, by bribing hospitals with something called the dish payment, disproportionate aid, in the tune of millions of dollars. So it actually cost us more to cover people, and then more with that dish payment each time to keep them silent. They went so far using very anti-democratic, we'll say, if not fascistic strategies to undermine democracy, even although they had most of the control of it. One thing they didn't have at the time was the control over something called the John Doe investigation that District Attorney John Chisholm had initiated because of campaign finance violations, which people may forget, turned out to get a number of people in jail because of their violation of the law. It was from that that expanded on and showed very clearly that Scott Walker had violated the law by coordinating with an outside group. They then used the law. The legislature then jumped in to, one, make sure that John Doe investigations could no longer happen against politicians. Then they made sure that what was deemed to be clearly illegal by the letter of the law in coordinating with an outside group, they made that legal. In Wisconsin, it continues to be the only state where that is legal. Every other state, it's illegal to coordinate with an outside group because of spending limits. They changed that law, and then, of course, the court intervened when it was under conservative control to then end the investigation and give the even further bizarre order to destroy all evidence immediately. This helped clear the plate of the last blockade holding democracy in place in Wisconsin, the courts. right? And so then at that point, it became clear that that was something that needed to change if anything was going to change in our state. But we know how that ended up. They use this to then use their power in the legislature. Courts set aside to put in place the most restrictive ID in the country. So it's something that still is in place, and they're trying to move towards a constitutional amendment to enshrine in the state. Early voting was limited in both capacity and by location and by time. They wanted all counties to have one early voting site. Do you remember that law? And they also wanted to curtail early voting by absentee ballot, limiting who would have access to it. Luckily, the federal courts intervened to stop those more egregious attempts to cut off the vote from moving forward. So that's why we have multiple sites available and pretty expansive ability to get an early ballot, which, you know, if somebody hasn't mentioned it already, encourage you to make sure to get your ballot just to get in the routine, especially considering there's going to be those school referendums most likely in your area. So something you can still do on myvote.gov, myvote.wi.gov. Thank you. So back to where we were, we still have all those voting sites available. You can still early vote. But until 2018, Republicans held unchecked power. They used it to slowly dissolve our democracy. But then that all changed in 2018. Wisconsin had enough, and statewide Democratic candidates at the top of the ticket rode the coattails of our favorite U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin in her historic victory to re-election. Democrats won all statewide offices, including the very important governorship and the attorney general spot. Republicans responded. This is pre-Trump, trying to overturn the election. They jumped in by immediately having a lame duck session. They did this in December before the new slate was sworn in. These limited the powers of the newly elected Democratic governor and the attorney general. The GOP seized the opportunity to hijack their powers and give many of them over to the legislature. This would have to do with rulemaking power through an obscure committee that I'm lucky enough to sit on to talk about that sometime. And by also limiting the ability of the attorney general to be able to pursue and settle lawsuits. They, of course, also took tied the hands of the governor from declaring that we would accept Badger care once and for all in our state, and more. So one other fascistic tendency that continued was the effort to undermine the public trust in our elections even after that. And of course, I do think that Wisconsin was a precursor to that in how much people back in when Charlie Sykes was a proud conservative compared to what he is now, would hint at voter fraud after every election, right? And folks will remember that there was even in the John Doe investigation a leaked document that showed that immediately in the 2011 campaign, one lobbyist for the MMAC was already saying that we should start implying that there was voter fraud while there was a close election deciding the Supreme Court at that time around. So a lot of these horrible tendencies, they started here. We have our proud progressive past to be proud of, but we also have Wyrick and the Bradleys. So, but I digress. And I do think that's worth pointing out because some of those folks are still around. This is an important thing for us to remember. We came within one vote on our state Supreme Court of being the only court in the country to greenlight Rudy Giuliani's 4-season strategy of trying to delay election certification. We came within one vote, and that was Brian Hagedorn had, I don't know if he was visited by 3 ghosts the previous night, but he ended up siding to say, no, you need to end the legal effort to block the certification of the election. That happened December 14th, which the same day fake electors took the wild and crazy baton and put it into the continue to push that wackadoo theory. Certified their fake election, handed it off to to Ron Johnson. So we have a lot of those folks who are still around. Just fast forward to the ruling on that. All those fake electors are only barred from acting as an elector for Donald Trump. That was the only response that they've had. And Wisconsin, I think, is a little bit further behind other states in stepping up and pushing some of these anti-democracy activists, these fascistic actors, to full account so that they can't participate in a system that they constantly seek to undermine. But yeah, remember that when Rebecca Bradley's seat and the next Ziegler's seat on the Supreme Court come up, because they voted for the Rudy Giuliani 4-season strategy to continue in the state, which was groundless and ruled as such by every court in the country. Anyways, following the 2020 election denial, Robin Vos felt obliged to cave to his right-wing folks. And then here's some of the names locally that you'll remember. Michelle Branchen was part of that group. Dan Knodel was part of that. Others on the fringe pushed this Donald Trump big lie and even hired the conspiracy theorist and former Supreme Court Justice Michael Gableman as the election investigator. After billing taxpayers $1 million plus, they didn't find a single shred of evidence of fraud. Vos finally fired Gableman in one of these rare glimpses of hope that we get, that Republicans are seeing the light, only to break down to where he is back in the good light of Donald Trump. Anyways, unfortunately, legislative Republicans continue to push debunked misinformation, outright lies, to sow doubt in our electoral process. That has proven to be has been proven time and again by experts that we have a free, fair, and secure elections in the state of Wisconsin, and don't let anybody tell you different. But that hasn't stopped them. That has included the threats to impeach officials, which is due for a discussion all of itself and how extreme that is. Mainly their threat was against Janet Protasewicz, but they've mentioned other officials, which is very concerning and not normal. The threats of a handful of Republicans came after Protasewicz overwhelmingly defeated, of course, Dan Kelly in the April election, but before the new justice had sat for a single case. So showing that they're going that far before she has even heard a case or sat on the bench. In the face of that accountability and looming possibility of fair maps, the GOP continues to have done everything to cling to power, and they show that after their policies have proven to be politically toxic to voters. So if Republicans do move to impeach and remove Janet, this is some piece of good news. This would be the most direct. This would be the most direct severe threat to democracy in our state. But of course, the governor could reappoint. But it gives it no less of an oomph for what that truly means. Because it's not about impeachment. It's about overturning an election, a clear election victory for the people of the state, saying that they don't want this rapid tilt that we have had where the people are being ignored. So I think it shows us a positive sign that the more people are ignored, the easier it is to be able to talk to them and bring them over to a side that recognizes that the only way we get things done is with each other through democracy. So gives us an opening, given how extreme that they've gotten. Republicans, of course, they're also trying to pass constitutional amendments to require a 2/3 vote of the legislatures, to look for that in this November's ballot. We'll talk about it, I'm sure, as it gets closer. Boston legislative Republicans, they see the writing on the wall, recently put forward this constitutional amendment to require 2/3 of vote of the state legislature to change certain tax laws, trying to lock in what they've done. They've, of course, been in power in 12 years, and if this was a priority, they would have done it long before this, but they're just preparing to prevent the people from actually being heard in our democracy. Of course, one of the worst things that they've done is the gerrymander on top of the gerrymander, which I would say it's the best for last, but obviously it's the worst, right? So it's that in reverse. Without the gerrymander, none of this is possible. They wouldn't be able to ignore you. They wouldn't be able to ignore the public, because they've tilted the election so that only the primary matters. we know this by heart by now, so I'm not going to review all this, but every 10 years the lines are drawn. This last cycle, they went to such extremes to be able to get the US Supreme Court involved. And so trying to tilt it in their elections their way, even though they've lost 14 of the last 17 statewide elections. So they still retain a supermajority in the Senate and a near supermajority in the Assembly. That's, of course, not what democracy looks like. But the tides are changing. Despite their best efforts, Evers was reelected by double the margin he was the prior term. Janet Protasevich defeated Dan Kelly by a 10-point landslide, changing the balance of the court for the first time in 15 years. And now, as we continue to tilt to increasingly blue, politicians and elected officials should reflect the people that they represent. So unfortunately, following the same authoritarian playbook he has over a decade, Voss is setting out to undermine the will of the voter again. It's important for people across Wisconsin to understand just how methodical and systemic Republican efforts have been to keep their hold on the levers of power despite a wildly unpopular policy agenda. They'll jump through any hurdle. They're doing these lame ducks, all to protect these gerrymandered maps. So stay tuned. As they pass both of these, there is a risk that they try and overturn the governor's veto in this final stretch. So they are desperate, and we are not stopping paying attention to what they're trying to do. My Democratic colleagues and I continue to speak truth to power. We honor the voices of Wisconsinites, and we'll work tirelessly to ensure their choices and values are reflected by the people who represent you. So we're about to get fair maps this spring. I will just give you an update from the field because I'm going a little bit off script. The two Supreme Court appointed maps, the two experts this Thursday said the two conservative drawn maps did not meet the criteria and were clear, quote, partisan gerrymanders, and were thrown out. So now it's down to the four. They could also send it back to an expert to do. And if that happens, just as an aside, I always feel like there's a trap door underneath us that's going to open here in Wisconsin. If they do try to bring to the U.S. Supreme Court, if they send it back like Amy Coney Barrett did 2 years ago, the court would have to redraw it. So again, that would just mean that they'd pick one of the other maps of those that remain. So now that we know that's at stake, what is next? And I think there's going back to the beginning and re-exercising some of those atrophied muscles of getting out and protesting, getting out, knocking to your door, knocking on your neighbor's doors, because hope is contagious and we must be the ones to spread it. There's an entire generation, I'll say this, being on campus a lot, there's an entire generation that feels like the social contract was never made with them. And simply pointing out the threat of Donald Trump, the threat of fascism, and the threat of what the legislature does isn't enough. We have to hear them and invite them into the room, and most importantly, hand over the reins of power to them, because they are going to lead eventually. So it's better that they lead now, where they don't feel like they're part of the process. And I think that's more important than anything. Of what I've said, and what else is happening this cycle is making sure that next generation does feel heard, and that hope spreads. So returning to where I started back on campus, that is where when I originally ran for office, would try to hand my pamphlets to those students, and very quickly would find the pile in the garbage can immediately behind, 20 feet up. I realized that day, earlier in the day, that the way to actually get through to students is to not talk to them, but to talk with them. And it was a quality, not a quantity thing. It's not as much as say, here it is, here's the message. It was, here's part of what I want to do. What do you want to see out of your government? And as basic as that sounds, that is going to be the only way that we get out of this mess, because otherwise people are in their bubbles. People that we know and love get caught in those bubbles too, And it's not the easiest thing to try and puncture that bubble by yourself. But in a lot of cases, if you have that power to do it, that is how we're going to make a difference here in the state where we are the closest in the entire country, and a tipping point for the entire country in the Electoral College. So no pressure, but I hope that we have that sober reflection of where we're at, but then also the spreading of hope as it springs up in me. Hopefully that springs up in you and springs up in those around you and everybody that you contact over the next crucial 9 months before the election. And with that, I think I turn it back over
to Cheryl.
to Cheryl. Okay, there it is. I see it. I circled it. Thank you, Cheryl.
No worries. Thank you so much, Chris. So as Chris, I think, wisely reminds us, education is the enemy of authoritarianism. So it's no coincidence that the MAGA Republicans in Wisconsin are working to defund public education. It's important to be reminded of all the outrageous assaults on majority rule and the will of the people that we've endured in Wisconsin. So Chris's harrowing walk down memory lane, I think, was really important for us to hear. It's easy to forget that this goes way back in time, and as awful as Trump is, he is not the only threat, and defeating him won't solve all of our problems. So, what an amazing program. I'd like to give a huge thanks and shout out to Senator Tammy Baldwin, Professor Ben Giat, and Senator Larson for taking time to speak with us this evening. It seems like every 4 years we say that this is the most important election of our lifetime, but none of us ever dreamed just how existential the 2024 elections will be. So, what are our elections? April 2nd is the spring election. It'll be local candidates as well as the presidential primary and 2 ballot questions to amend the Wisconsin Constitution. It's important to come out and vote for Biden in April to show his strength in Wisconsin. Regarding the ballot question to amend the Constitution, even politically engaged people often are unaware that these ballot questions will be on the ballot or what they mean. So we have a program on March 17th that is aimed at increasing awareness and understanding of this latest anti-majoritarian attempt, basically to get around Governor Evers' veto by our gerrymandered legislature. Watch for another email with more information on this program and to sign up. On August 13th, we have the state partisan primary, and of course, the big election in the fall on November 5th. We urge you to apply for an absentee ballot for all elections, as Chris noted. Even if you've applied for one in the past, you have to renew your request every year. And even if you receive an absentee ballot, you can still vote in person instead, as long as you don't return the absentee ballot. So it just gives you lots of flexibility. It also allows you to see what's on your ballot in advance, so you don't get caught going into the booth and going, what the heck are these ballot questions and what the heck do they even mean? Grassroots North Shore exists to give each of its members agency. We offer a variety of ways to do your part to help save our democracy. We'll be writing postcards for the April election and the November election, we do follow-up phone calls to the postcard recipients, because more touches means more active and engaged citizens. You can sign up to canvass for the Wisconsin Democrats. We have sign-up links in our newsletter. You can pass out flyers at UWM and MyAd. Chris mentioned how important it is to engage campus voters, the young people. I've done that at UWM, and it's a lot of fun. And even though they're busy and kind of sometimes have to run after them to have a quick word, they are engaged. They understand that their rights are under attack, and they just need to know where to go to vote, and what to do. Another thing that the Wisconsin Dems have started is what they call friend banking. They have a new app called Reach that you can use to contact family, friends, and neighbors with reminders to vote. I tried it yesterday, and one person I hadn't seen in years, but I sent a text who replied, I was going to type stop when I saw your name, right? So it shows how much more effective that one-on-one with people you know can be. Not that we don't still need to go out knocking on doors and doing those cold calls as well, but I think that doing this relational organizing, as they call it, is great, um, a great addition to our arsenal. And you can also help register voters at DMV offices with Supermarket Legends. We'll send an email after the event that will include contacts and sign up links for all of these opportunities. And you can also check our newsletter every week for these and other activities. Thank you, all of you, for joining us this evening, for your engagement, and for the things that you will do to help save our democracy. Our time is now. Good night.